All right, welcome to another episode of The More You Know. And you can't, I would never guess this in a thousand years where I would randomly meet someone online who wants to be a guest on this show that shares the same last name as me, which is really, really interesting. So, if you guys don't know, my name is Brian Yu, and I found Tommy you on Reddit, and what are the odds? But Tommy, can you give us a brief introduction of yourself, man?
Absolutely. Just like Brian said, my name is Tommy Yu. And just a quick introduction for me, I am a first generation Korean. So English is actually my second language. But I feel like I worked so hard to try to figure out this English language at such a young age. You don't want to get bullied and things like that, where I really fell in love with the language. So I eventually went to school for communications because I just loved communicating with people. I feel like a lot of that is actually rooted from growing up when you don't know the English language, you're kind of isolated. So I always joke around with my friends saying, hey, I like to talk a lot now to kind of make up for the fact of how many times I couldn't talk to you guys when I was growing up when I didn't know. So, fast forward to now, I grew up in Pennsylvania, Philadelphia to be specific. I love Philly. I know they don't have the best reputation, but, I am one of those Philly people. But with that, I feel like it's really cliche to say, but with the pandemic and everything occurring, in the beginning of 2020, it's already 2021. This full year went by, and I feel like I've grown a lot within myself within this past year. And like, I feel like I've grown a lot more personally. Mentally and I guess even professionally, in almost like this maturity that I've never seen within myself. And I actually credit that a lot to the topic that we're going to be talking about today, which is meditation spirituality. But before I kind of get onto that route, to kind of describe who I was before, I was kind of full of myself, really. I had a big ego, and I don't mean that to be like I was brash or aggressive, but I cared a lot what people thought of me. I always wanted to be the funniest one in the room, or I always wanted to be liked and things like that. And I was also known, for people who knew me might surprise, but I have a short temper as well. I don't really show that in public because, when you're with your friends, it's very rare where you lose your temper. But I mean, like personally, I'm also married. Just like the littlest thing will bother me and I'll get all mad and bent out of shape. And I really didn't like the side of myself. And, when the pandemic happened, a lot of people were kind of forced to be isolated and confronted with who you are. And so I've been through this phenomenal journey where at this point I feel like I've changed a lot, but I'm still true to who I am. So people who know me, they're like, oh yeah, it's still Tommy, but there's this like different vibe with him now. And that's actually a big encouragement for me because that means, the little changes I've been trying to implement has been working. So this is just my long-winded way of saying, hey, that's who I am. I'm no expert at this by any means, but someone who does practice both mindfulness, meditation, all that kind of stuff. So when you kind of, when our paths cross, saying, anyone who might not be an expert but knows something in some health fields and things like that, I jumped at that opportunity to kind of talk about something that I was passionate about.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I can definitely relate to that. Cause like back in college days, I myself was the type of person who always wanted to kind of fit in everywhere. So I am really into fitness and all that. And I used to be that type of person who used to post on Instagram a lot, quote unquote a influencer. Well, tried to be a influencer, and um, as the likes started coming in, the bar kind of just rose, and as the bar kind of rose, and sometimes it would stagnate, sometimes even I wouldn't get the performance out of Instagram that I wanted, and that was something that kind of was like a big wake up call to me, where I was like, okay, I'm beating myself up just because some people aren't liking my photos, and that's kind of like with you too. Um, you kind of just have that aha moment,
Mhm.
and the reason why I like talking about meditation and mindfulness so much is because there are a lot of definitions of how people view mindfulness and meditation. For my listeners out there, if you have been listening to all of my episodes, you might remember Connor. Connor has like 100% like transformed his life with mindfulness and meditation. And if you go back to our recent episodes with him, you can see his point of view of like how he views things. And I think it's really beneficial to see how other people see it too, so you don't get under the mindset of like, oh, mindfulness and meditation, he must mean this and this. But no,
Mhm.
there's a lot of ways to look at it, and getting the most perspectives of it gives you the greater chance of like learning and developing your own type of mindfulness and meditation that fits in with your life. Tommy, could you tell us more about what was your aha moment of like, okay, I need to start focusing on myself. I don't care what other people think of me, and I need to do stuff that I like and what I think is good.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like you brought up a lot of really great points, but it was kind of a similar moment in my life. It's after really college and things like that. And then, the harsh real world really hits you. And I don't want to be, a pessimist or negative. I'm actually a very optimistic and happy person. But, the real world started to hit me when, I was kind of in the flow of every single day. I was working, trying to just make enough income, pay off all your bills, maybe save enough for vacation. I almost felt like I was living life on autopilot. The days started to flow together, and everyone knows that cliche saying of, time moves so fast. And when you're younger, you're like, yeah, whatever, it's just a saying. But it's not really until I'm done or everyone finish up school where that becomes a reality. It's almost like you don't have the expectations of, oh, I need to do this assignment, then oh, I have to study for my final, I also have this due this day. You have so many deadlines where you feel like time is moving so slow because you're always working against the clock. Whereas once you're out of this weird school setting, you're working and you might have projects and responsibilities, but the days all kind of feel the same. Like my work week is my work week, then I might have a couple plans here and there for the weekend, but then when Monday rolls around, you just repeat everything again. And so I felt a little bit empty. I felt like I wanted more meaning in my life. I wanted to make more of a difference, but I also knew at the moment of my life, I wasn't having like a midlife crisis. It was more of, wow, what's really going on? Is this the purpose? Is this what I want to do? And that's when I started to self reflect. And that's kind of when the pandemic came in. And honestly, I feel like there's been a huge rise in the movement of mindfulness and meditation. And I feel like the rise of it isn't a coincidence. We live in like some of the most unfulfilling and disconnected times. And by that, I mean, we live in life where we live in sound bites, we live in tweets, we live in likes. Visual and sensory overstimulation is it kind of makes everything oversaturated to the point where real life kind of seems dull by comparison. So it's like this instant gratification. Time moves so fast, and I was getting kind of scared. I'm 28 right now. I'm closer to 30 than I am to 20. A lot of people are gonna laugh and say, "Oh, you're only 28. Like you're so young. So don't complain saying you're old." That's not what I mean at all. It's just almost a shock to me because I still feel like that same 21-year-old who's just like, oh yeah, I mean, I'm still a kid, I'm still trying to figure things out. But now I'm at the point where I'm able to deliberately slow down my life. And I really like that you brought up that there's a lot of this stigma that's kind of around mindfulness and meditation that I'm trying to deter people. Because a lot of the times when people are saying, oh, Tommy, what do you like to do? And then whenever I say something along the lines of, oh, I'm very spiritual now, or I like to meditate and practice mindfulness, and everyone's like, oh, okay, don't open up those can of worms. That's weird. And I feel like a lot of the times, and I don't mean to put this in a negative context, but a lot of the times people associate a lot of things. And what I'm here to do is kind of eliminate that stigma. Meditation doesn't mean you have to light an incense, close all your blinds, sit on the floor, lights off. I mean, if that's the best way for you to get into the Zen state of mind of meditation, by all means do it.
That is
But
my
my
favorite way because, like, for me,
put on
for
some
me,
soundscapes, right?
yeah, for real. I just put on some frequencies and I sit on the floor and I put my AirPods in and I'm
Oh,
just
beautiful.
locked in.
I mean, who doesn't like that? And that's why I always like to say, if that's your stigma and saying, no, I don't like to meditate because I don't like to do that, that's completely fine. That's a lot of extra time and effort that you have to put into it. But for me personally, just like you, I love that. I feel like I could really have the most peaceful moment. And My definition of meditation is honestly just unplugging yourself from how fast paced the world is, almost deliberately slowing everything down. I'm sure for the listeners that are listening right now, as you quote unquote start to adult, you start to kind of accrue all this different responsibility. You start being pulled in all different directions only because, that's what adulting is, forcing to be responsible. And there's a lot of times where you're always thinking about the next thing. Then, like when I'm working, I'm thinking, oh, when is the next thing due? Oh, okay, after work, I have to make dinner. But, before dinner, I want to meditate, but oh wait, I have to get a shower, and like that conversation you have internally keeps going to the point where you're not enjoying what you're doing at that moment because you're always thinking ahead. And I feel like for me, meditation is just disconnecting, slowing everything down, and just really enjoying the exact moment that you are. So that's my long-winded way of saying meditation can be sitting in a dark room, lighting an incense, soundscapes, AirPods, all that kind of stuff. Or for me, I always tell my friends, hey, when you're taking a shower, you can meditate right there. Like not close your eyes, sit on the bathtub with the shower raining on you like a waterfall. I mean, that'd be kind of cool. But
That
what I
is a
mean,
very good experience. If you have never tried that, I definitely recommend doing that. Sitting
yeah.
down in the shower with a nice warm hot water
Oh,
pouring
pretend
on
it's like a
top of you.
waterfall, right?
Yes, it's amazing. It's amazing. But to
You can.
build on like you're talking about with like meditating, we might be like, despite having the same last name, I feel like me and you are really similar in these types of way. I don't know about you, but I'm the type of person who I like to do work in silence. So if I need to be like, if I'm studying for something or if I'm really intensely reading something, I need it to be silent. Like I can't study with music
Mhm.
in the background. I can't study when it's noisy. But then there's people that are completely opposite of where they can function perfectly, where they can listen to music with lyrics or even a podcast and also study something. So there are going to be people out there that can probably meditate with noise around them, but personally for me, I like it when it's completely silent.
I love that you brought that context because a lot of the times I always mention there's no wrong way to do it. You could seek meditation, that moment when you're about to go to sleep, your head's on the pillow, you're all tucked in, but you're not quite asleep yet. And that's where kind of those memes come up where, like, oh, like you always replay those big embarrassing moments right when you're about to go to sleep, or you always think of some fantasy, some dream, or whatever. But for me personally, right before I go to sleep, that's a perfect time for me to meditate, perfect to just not think about responsibilities, not think about anything, just thinking in that moment, wow, I am living under a roof. I have good health. Like right in this moment, even though I have a lot of stress, responsibilities, deadlines I have to meet, but right now I'm okay. This is pretty cool. And kind of like what we mentioned in the shower, you don't have to sit down. You could just stand up, just, while you're lathering your hair with shampoo and things like that. Just take that time to disconnect. But kind of like what you mentioned, there's no rules, in my opinion. And I feel like if anyone were to come to you when you quote unquote are meditating and someone says you're doing it wrong, they themselves are not practicing what they preach. And that's where the mindfulness really comes in because meditation is kind of the act of disconnecting, but mindfulness is kind of your perception of life. You kind of completely change that perception. So I kind of actually want to ask you, Brian, what is your take? How would you define mindfulness?
Mindfulness for me is like, for me it's a lot of like not focusing on the exterior. Like even if that is like zoning out, I
Hmm.
consider that being in a state of mindfulness because you're just living in the moment. You're like, for me, when I zone out, I don't have anything really going through my head, and that's my way of disconnecting from the world for a second to enjoy the silence of like not having my phone go off or not having a Microsoft Teams call or chat going off. It's just a state of like where you're just completely at peace of mind with yourself. And
Hmm.
but that can be either, like you said, you can just be in the shower, hot water with just like your favorite music or something in the background, just something in a really relaxing state where like you have no uh distractions coming in.
Yeah, and that's a beautiful definition. And that's why I always like to ask people. I know I kind of blindsided you with that question,
Oh,
didn't do
no
any prep,
worries.
but I really love how organic that answer was because I absolutely agree. And kind of similar to what you were mentioning when you kind of asked me about, meditation, how I got into it, and, try to eliminate some of these stigmas, kind of similar to mindfulness. People think it's like, this huge definition you have to remember, or there's only one way to do it. I absolutely agree with everything you said. And just to add a little bit more context to it, for me, I think a very easy way to define mindfulness would be just being more aware, just more aware of the decisions, more aware of the thoughts. And I know that kind of sounds a little weird to define that way, but I mean, almost like when you start to react naturally to something, let's say you spill milk all over the counter and you're already late for work and now you have to clean, and of course you're getting frustrated because X, Y, and Z. Think of it in a mindful setting where you just think, okay, all that happened right now is I just spilled milk. Yes, it's inconvenient, but now me reacting in a negative way isn't going to make anything better. Like what happened has happened. Now I just have to deal with it, just keep moving on essentially. And I love mindfulness because it almost forces you to separate yourself within yourself. I know that's like a really complex kind of thought, but anytime I start going in autopilot, or ever since or whenever I see my instincts go and I react because I'm laughing at something, or I get really upset about something, or I feel my short temper coming, I almost have to start separating myself from myself, saying, yo, Tommy, calm down. Like, you shouldn't be reacting that way. It's not that big of, just take a couple breaths. Everything is going to be fine. And I feel like practicing mindfulness is always kind of that theme of respect, not just for yourself, but everyone around you. And honestly, that's what mindfulness is all about. I feel like if everyone practiced a little mindfulness, it'd be fantastic, and everyone, we just all be in a better place. And one of the biggest mindfulness is also being aware, and I mentioned this before, of your ego. And one thing I've been trying to do is letting go of my ego. And by that, I mean, a lot of the times I almost fall into that trap. I call it the ego trap. And let me just explain that real quick and just ask if you've ever fallen in an ego trap, because I definitely have. Ego trap is always thinking that you're better than someone just because of X, Y, and Z. And by that, a quick couple of examples is thinking that you're quote unquote more spiritual because you ride your bike to work, or, ride the bus or something like that, and judging people that drive a gas guzzling car, or judging people because they watch reality TV, something that you would think, saying, oh, that's so trashy, like why would you watch that? Oh, what I watch, I just watch TED Talks, like I'm better than you because of that. Like I actually read, I don't watch TV. So it's almost like putting yourself in a higher level, even like, oh, I meditate, you don't, so that means I'm better. Or, oh, I've been meditating for 3 years, you just started, so I'm better at it. That's None of that is true. Everything I just said is not true. And so a big part of mindfulness is always respecting everyone you're talked to. So if someone else likes something I don't, that's okay because it brings them joy. So why should I bring that down? So, Brian, have you ever fallen for these ego traps? Because for me personally, I definitely find myself judging, like my wife. She's a school teacher. She's an absolute saint. But she, on her free time, she just likes watching these shows that I don't understand why she likes to watch. Because I'm like, well, it's just so much drama, this reality TV. Like, what are you doing? Like, why don't we do something more constructive? But I have to stop myself saying, no, she deals with work all day long, stress. If this is her way of just kind of turning her brain off, just almost her way of meditating, really, of just kind of just enjoying. I don't have the right to demean that. Like, who cares if that's what she likes to do? I should support that. I shouldn't just be upset because she's doing it. So that's a couple ways I've identified this quote unquote ego trap. But I kind of want to turn that around you. Have you ever found yourself judging other people, or even feeling like you're superior because of X, Y, and Z?
Yes, I have definitely fallen into many ego traps. It was really bad in college because one, when you work out, you kind of naturally have a big ego. Um, so naturally that, but like even in like some school situations too, where you're just like, okay, like how did I study for like the whole weekend, but my buddy just took the same exam and scored higher than me, and he just did an all nighter.
Mm.
That's one of the biggest ego traps that I kind of fell
Oh,
into a
that's
lot.
such a good point.
And then it was kind of more toward like senior year too, is when like senior year of college, you're looking for jobs, and like everyone around you is getting jobs, and then you're sitting there, and then you're not getting, like, all you're getting are interviews, but you're not getting the offers. And then you look around, and then you're just like, how are these people getting it? When you kind of, and then you just sit there like looking at your accomplishments and like what you've been doing to like get yourself to like a higher position, but you just can't seem to land anything. And that's a big that was a big ego trap in college. But I mean, for me, even now, like, for me, like, my terms of like relaxation, like, I don't know, I just kind of became a workaholic, I feel like, because
Oh
like
no.
because like I just like doing stuff that's going to be meaningful for the future. So
Mhm.
in that terms, it's just like whenever I'm not doing something, it feels like I'm just wasting time, because like I could be spending this time doing stuff for my blog, stuff for the podcast, advertising
Mhm.
for the podcast, something to make me passive income or something. That's always running through my head, and I just love like doing stuff that's meaningful, really.
Mhm.
But it's been hard to kind of set that on the back burner and just be like, hey, it's okay. It's okay to, like, watch TV for like the whole day and not feel bad about it because you had a long week.
Yeah, and well, first of all, I really appreciate your transparency, your humbleness. It takes a lot of awareness just to say, "No, I fall into these ego traps." And here are some examples, because it takes a big person to really just admit it, but then also airing it out in this type of platform. It takes a lot of courage to also do that. So, I mean, it's really fascinating for me for people to kind of do a little bit of that self-reflection. And this is still something I struggle with all the time. I know I'm on here to try to really advocate people saying, "Hey, I mean, you owe it to yourself to just have that 5 minutes, whether it means, you get somewhere in your car early and you're in the parking lot, just take just 5 minutes, just sit in your car. If you want to have the radio on, you can do so. Or if you're like me, just turn everything off and just sit there and saying, for this 5 minutes, I'm just going to be. That's it. I'm just gonna be. And it's so cool because then you really feel how long these 5 minutes are, and then you really start to contextualize different things. And that's why, especially with someone like you who likes to do something constructive, which is definitely shown through this podcast. I've listened to, I'm not going to lie and say I've listened to all of them, but I've listened to about 3 or 4 episodes in preparation for this. And it's just fascinating that you're able to put together something to help others. I know it's been a lot of fun for this journey for you to be able to interview guests and things like that, but I feel like it's really admirable. Like you said, in almost this workaholic way that you've identified, thinking, I mean, yeah, you have every right to, just sit, play video games, or just, watch TV all the time. But in your head, you're thinking, no, no, I mean, I could do that. Or, like you mentioned, I could work at something at the podcast, something that has value to you, which is really, really neat to see. And I feel like a lot of mindfulness can also, assist in that way. And so, one quick thing I always like to mention is this one great quote by Sri Ravi Shankar. And they mention that nothing in the world can bother you as much as your own mind. In fact,
Mm-hmm.
others seem to be bothering you, but it's not others, it's your own mind. So your brain has this weird way of twisting reality to make you feel like, oh my gosh, I can't do that. I'll look so dumb. Or no, 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 no. You're not good enough to do that. Like, it's so twisted and I hate to see it. So through this journey of being more mindful, just being more aware of myself has really helped me not just gain confidence, but really, in a weird sense of a way, trust myself in these situations. Whereas in the past, like I said, I had, a short temper. I wouldn't say I had an anger issue, but it pretty much balanced on almost anger issues, where I would not put myself in situations where thinking, oh no, if I go there, I'm going to be in an argument, I'm going to lash out. But now I'm thinking, wow, if I now lose my temper, that will be a surprise to me, because I feel like I've put in so much work to try to lose that part of myself. And I know that sounds awful saying, oh, like that's like a forced change, but sometimes you just have to be aware enough for things like that. So, for me, I always like to say things like that with mindfulness, and then almost trying to come back full circle with meditation. I kind of want to hear your story, Brian, of meditation. How long have you been doing it? What have you gotten out of it?
For meditation, for me, I kind of fell off the train for a little bit because a lot of meditation was like when I was still looking for jobs, really. Kind of like toward the end of last year. It
Hmm.
was just like rejection after rejection after rejection. it gets to your head and it makes your mind say some really not nice things about you, and it really tears you down as a person. So that's when I found meditation of like where well, before meditation I got introduced to like frequency sound waves from my friend Connor,
Oh wow.
and I listened to the frequencies, and then like just having those on with like nothing around you, I found that I became more relaxed. So I had a lot of like inside thoughts of like, okay, I'm never gonna find a new job. I'm never gonna advance in life. I'm never gonna like meet my goal of what I want to be and where I want to be. So I turned to meditation toward the end of the night, usually before bed, after a shower where I'm already like relaxed. And I'll just sit down with myself and just close my eyes and forget about everything around me, forget everything in my mind, just get a clear mind before I go to bed. Cause I didn't want to go to bed feeling like I'm a failure or disappointment,
Mm.
and just dragging that on to the next day. So I wanted to quote, I want to say it's like a mental refresh where
Oh yeah.
at the end of the night you just clear your head. You end the night with a clean, fresh mind, and then you wake up with a clean, fresh mind. And from that point on, it's kind of just up to you of how you want to start your day, really. And for me, I wanted to make sure that I had better days. So I woke up with a more positive attitude as like, okay, um, today's my day. I'm gonna make today my day. Walk in it with a good attitude, smiles, listening to the music that I do like that gets you in a happy, joyful mood. And from there on, like it kind of taught me to not get frustrated or angry at the things that come to me to that day, really, because I know that if I decided to get mad in like early in the morning, it would kind of just carry on throughout the day. So it made me more aware of like what was happening in certain situations, and just kind of come to terms with it and be like, okay, it happened. I felt the emotion of angry or sad, and then I felt it, and then I can let it go and carry on.
Wow, that's absolutely beautiful. I really like how you said it was almost like a mental refresh. I actually describe it as like a mental palate cleanser, if you will. You just eliminate all the gunk, all that, negative energy, and just you almost, like you said, you refresh yourself. And I feel like one of the biggest points I want to kind of drive across, and I do apologize to listeners if I'm repetitive and things like that, but I really want to destroy that stigma of meditation. It doesn't need to take that much effort. And I always like to say, for people who try to think of what meditation is, a lot of the times people will say, oh, it's when you just try to empty your mind and sit there and think about absolutely nothing. And I always say, meditation isn't actually trying to clear the noise in your mind. It's about reminding yourself that the voices aren't your identity. That will actually within itself start to clear your mind. So I always like to say, for people who are first time trying to meditate, or some people who have tried to meditate and say, no, it's too hard, it's not for me. I always say, hey, just with me for the next 10 minutes. How about we meditate together and I'll try to help you out. And if they ever are receptive, I always just say, hey, just sit there. Don't force yourself to think about nothing, but just be aware of your thoughts. Try to have the discipline to let a thought enter your mind, but just don't pursue it. And then almost think of, I wonder why I was thinking about that right now when I'm trying to be calm. Oh, I have to pick up, something at the pharmacy. Oh, wait. No, I don't. Right now, I'm just right here. I got to let that thought go and just continue to be at peace. And so I always say that there's no goal to meditating. It's just being. And I know I mentioned that before, but I know a lot of people aren't satisfied with that answer, saying, oh, so you're saying there's no meaning to meditation, there's no goal to it, and things like that. And so if you really want me to almost summon a goal, I'll say the goal of meditation isn't to control your thoughts, it's to let them stop controlling you. It's almost kind of being in this type of discipline that's fantastic. And one quick anecdote I like to say that I actually am a little bit into Buddhism, which is kind of what caused me into it, but I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole. But one Buddhist monk actually once told me, saying, life is like a game of Tetris. And I was like, I was taken a little bit back, and I said, what does that even mean? And they said, life is unpredictable. You never know what's going to happen. You never know how you're going to react, but that's what life is. Just like in a game of Tetris, when you're playing Tetris, you always see the next little block that's about to come up. And I know the meme is you always want that line, right? You want that big horizontal line to eliminate this huge row, but you're waiting for it, but it's not coming. Instead, you get that weird four little block thing, and you're like, oh, darn it, I got this. All right, whatever. But he said, in that way, that's what life is. In Tetris, when you obviously really want that line and you don't get it, you don't sit there and put pause and complain about saying, "Oh my god, why did I get this block? I wanted the line. This isn't fair. I'm just, oh god, I hate this." You just kind of move that piece where it needs to be for the
You
time
work
being.
with it. You
Yeah, you
work with
work
it.
with it. You have to be like, all right, I'm just gonna move this over here. It's not, it wasn't a part of the plan, but it will be eventually. And just like in Tetris, you have to do that in real life. You don't know what to be expected next. You could definitely try to plan, just like in Tetris, you definitely plan. Um, but just like in Tetris, when life throws something random at you that you weren't expecting, a lot of the times, and I'm 100% still guilty to this day to being upset about it, or almost feeling bad about myself, saying, oh man, why did this happen? I wasn't planning for this. But the monk just said, no, treat it like a game of Tetris. Just work with it. Move it to a part of your life where you could at least work, because I promise you it will turn around. Something will happen. All you have to do is keep pushing. So just very similar, unless you play Tetris differently than I do. I definitely don't, like, of course I'm gonna be like, oh man, I wanted the other thing. All right, here, I'm just gonna move this over here and keep going. That's how life should be. And when he said that to me, it was such a simple statement, but it really resonated with me. So I kind of want to get your take on that, because I always have a lot of fun telling that little anecdote of what meditation mindfulness could eventually do. And I almost got mad because the monk just said it so simply. I was always trying to find some kind of anecdote to kind of help people along this, mental journey. And he just said it, life is like a game of time. I'm like, how do you do it that simply? Like, you have such a gift. But what is your take on, that kind of metaphor?
First of all, I have never related more to a wise saying in my life because I am an avid Tetris player, and that is probably the worst thing that could happen. Because that is my plan too. I normally just stack up and then just wait for that horizontal line so I can just knock out like five. But like once you up the levels and the faster it goes, oh god, it's on. But yeah, but yeah, I love that because it kind of throws it kind of relates to like my current situations that like I'm preparing for a move from Georgia to Ohio, and right now I have a plan of like what expenses I'm going to need to pay, what I'm going to have to do uh to move, like what I have to order, what I have to schedule, what I have to cancel here. But that's all part of the plan. But like there have been like moments in this move process where there's like an unexpected thing that comes up, and I can either sit there and just ask of like, oh my god, I didn't plan for this and just completely melt down, or just incorporate it into the current plan. And although it does mess it up in the future, the the way you look at life is not in the short term. So if you see like a little blip in your life, that's only in that moment. And if you zoom out of the picture, you're still not even like halfway through life. And eventually it's going to blip up and then it's going to come back down and then it's all going to come back to normal. And that's only going to cause a disruption for like depending what it can be short term and maybe a little bit for the longer term, but it's not going to be permanent. And there's always going to be that point where you are going to come back to like equilibrium, I want to say,
Hmm.
where that mistake or random thing that jumps into your life isn't going to be a big thing. And that's how I view a lot of mishaps that happen in life that are unexpected.
Wow, and it takes a lot of mental discipline to even get to the point where you're able to conceptualize it that way. And I'm sure you can definitely let the listeners know, and myself as well. It takes a lot of discipline. It takes a lot of work to kind of change your mindset in that way. I know we kind of discussed a little bit before we started to air on the podcast, just so we could get to know each other a little bit more. But I was just so fascinated to hear your story and how you're moving back and forth, but just still hearing this like glow of optimism in your voice, whereas other people in your position might be kind of disappointed or upset that they have to continue to move and do all this kind of stuff. But just to see someone that's really just kind of going with the flows of life and just embracing life, I think that was just so refreshing to hear, which definitely makes sense because that's what the context of these podcasts are. I know a lot of the times when I make my own podcast, I feel like, oh, like no one's gonna listen to this, like what's the point of this? But then at the end of the day, I always think, wow, this did so much for me. It doesn't matter. But someone in your case, and I could be a great testimony for it too. Like I said, I just listened to a handful, and I thought, wow, I want to listen to a lot more because I'm getting a lot out of this. So I feel like it's really awesome that you're able to have this type of platform to be able to kind of explain just a lot of different things. I know you said you're really into fitness, but fitness has a lot of different categories they could go to, obviously physical, emotional, mental, and things like that. So it's really cool to see you be so versatile enough to be able to kind of hit all those different categories. So I feel like it's really nice to kind of slowly start changing that perception within yourself because of that understanding. And like I always mentioned, I really hope the people listening are going to be a little bit more open minded, if you will, when it comes to this type of thoughts. Even still, I kind of catch myself thinking, oh no, I'm not super meditation man or really into mindful spirituality, which in fact I am. But if you were to meet me, you wouldn't expect that. And that's, in my opinion, pretty cool because it shouldn't be something that defines me. It should be something that I get a lot out of. But and of course, if any of my friends are ever looking for advice, I'm not like shoving meditation in their throat saying, "Oh, just do this." And every second, I my friends kind of joke with me now. It's like, "Oh, Tommy, here he comes." The meme is, "Hey guys, how you doing? By the way, did you listen to my last podcast?" Like I'm totally turning into that meme. But the funny thing is, that's one thing I didn't want to happen with meditation spirituality. That's why it's always been so sensitive for me to bring it up with my friends because I didn't want to be that guy that always pushes that type of agenda. So a lot of the times when people figure out I really enjoy meditation, spirituality, mindfulness, they're almost surprised. But then when they hear me talk about it, they're like, wow, I didn't think about it that way, which makes me feel good. That makes me feel like I've done my job to kind of end that stigma. And so I just really appreciate you just, allowing me to just bother you for, a while to kind of allow myself to really talk about that passion. And it's just kind of ending that stigma. Everyone can give it a chance. And of course, it's not for anyone, but a lot of the times I feel like the people that are most turned off or do not like mindfulness, meditation, spirituality, it might be because they're going in with a mindset of thinking, oh, this is not for me. This is not going to work. I could almost promise you, if you go in with that mindset with anything, you will most likely not enjoy whatever you're about to do, but just try to give it a real big chance. And one thing I always like to say is the ego thing I brought up, like the ego trap and just being aware of it. I always like to also say that ego says once everything falls into place, you'll feel peace. But spirit says find your peace and everything will fall into place. And I thought that was just a beautiful saying to almost sum up what spirituality is. For me, I don't think spirituality and religion are completely connected. I feel them as two separate things that are definitely intertwined, but I view as spirituality as just being more in touch with yourself. I always regard it's almost like a hippie thing, really, just being in touch with who you are and what you're meant to do. And I feel like once you really start to identify what brings you peace, what brings you happiness, instead of thinking, oh, if I make enough money and pay off all the rent, then everything will be fine. Well, yes, that could be true, but why not just think, why can't everything be fine right now and just hope that everything kind of falls into place? It's kind of always kind of changing that perspective. And I feel like that's kind of the big thesis or theme of this is all it takes is just a change of perspective and hopefully just kind of viewing things in a little bit more optimistic light, like almost like the game of Tetris.
Oh man, I just can't believe Are you sure we're not the same person?
I mean, we have the same last name already. If I find
Like,
out that I had a long lost brother named Brian and it was you, I would be very excited because now I'd be like, oh, now I have a new forced best friend. You can't escape me now because you're my family.
but honestly, yeah, like everything that you said is like the way and how I kind of see things. Um, Big thing for this podcast was just for this podcast series in general, is just like learning more and just being open to seeing things in other ways, having an open mind, and don't be stuck in one way of thinking, and just exposing people to knowledge and just experiences.
And that's beautiful. And not just that, but you also give people platforms like myself who, once again, I'm not an expert by any means. And it's comical when people hear, like, oh, wow, he's only been doing this for like a year. Like, he doesn't really have the right to talk about it. And you know what? I'm inclined to believe you. Listeners, if you think that about me, you're absolutely correct. I have no certificate. It's comical that I'm even talking about it, but it's not that I'm experiencely or it's not like I'm really experienced in everything that I'm saying. It's just it's something that's really worked for me and I think it could work for you, especially in these times where you know, times are moving so fast, things seem bleak, and how the world is feeling at this moment. It's more important now than ever. Like you mentioned, I was really into social media. My job is actually in charge of other people's social media. I'm a digital content creator for an organization. So that means I kind of help with the internal, external marketing on online digital presence. So my job is literally, or part of my job, is running the digital reputation of all the different social media accounts. So naturally, of course, I'm connected in that way, but it almost forces me to say, wow, this is a lot of work. I don't want to be on social media after work because that's what I do for work. So I've been very fortunate enough to almost be like off the grid in that way. But it's just in these times where everything's hustling and bustling, just to really try to get back in touch with yourself because I feel like we're slowly becoming more and more separated from who we are.
Yeah, yeah, and I couldn't have said it. You couldn't have said it better. Unfortunately, we are hitting that time limit right now. Tommy, it was a amazing opportunity to connect with you and hearing your experiences. I definitely learned a lot about you and like uh, just a whole new way of seeing and like perceiving mindfulness and meditation. Where can my listeners find you?
Absolutely. Like I said, I'm mostly off the grid, but I also have a podcast myself, and I know you're going to appreciate it because it's definitely a terrible pun with our last names. It's just called You Dive Deep. You is spelled YU, just the way that you would spell our last name. So it's You Dive Deep, and it's a podcast that kind of talks about very similar to what we talked about today. It's kind of an open discussion, but the way that the show is formatted is each episode revolves around a different quote unquote philosophical or deep question. Whether that means what is happiness or how would you define success, all the way to some maybe more things that you're forced to think about, such as unfortunately, if you were to pass away right now, what would you be remembered for? Like all these different type of deep questions. And every single episode, not only do I dive in deep into one of these philosophical slash deep questions, I also have a guest, and it's always a new guest. And every guest that I have, I try to pick a specific question that I feel like would be a great topic. So it's not like I'm randomly picking a question first and then finding a guest for it. I find my guest and then have like a catalog of, hundreds of questions that I would love to discuss, and then I kind of find one thinking, oh, wow, if I'm fortunate enough to have you, Brian, on my podcast, I would talk to you more and be like, you know what, Brian, I feel like this would be perfect for where we both are in our lives. This would be the question that I feel like we could dive the deepest. So, yep, you can find me on most platforms, but you could also follow me on social media. I know I said I personally have been off the grid, but after doing this podcast game, I realized that you need to have a social media. So I actually created a social media for my podcast. I think I have like one follower on both platforms. I'm on Twitter and Instagram. It's You Dive Deep, no spaces, no numbers. So I was really happy to kind of get that little domain. Once again, it's spelled YU, You Dive Deep. So, like I said, Brian, I know I'm kind of putting you on the spot. I really hope to have you at some point on that show as well. And for all you listeners, if you kind of enjoyed a little bit of what I was talking about here, I'm sure you will like it there as well.
And everything that Tommy has listed will be linked in the description of this podcast. Once again, Tommy, thank you so
What a
much
bet.
for joining me on my podcast and sharing so much knowledge with with me. Your words of wisdom are going to be deeply appreciated and remembered. But yeah, thanks so much for coming on, man.
No problem. Just thank you for letting me have the platform and just kind of bothering you for a little bit, my long lost brother.
All right, and that's a wrap. I hope you enjoyed this show of The More You Know. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider rating this podcast on Apple Podcasts. It'll certainly help me out in the algorithm, and be sure to subscribe or follow to The More You Know on your favorite podcasting platform like Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or Google Podcasts, or any of your favorite podcasting apps. And lastly, if you would like to contribute to The More You Know, you can head over to anchor.fm// The More You Know Pod and contribute any monetary value to help the quality of the show, and in the future bring on some more interesting guests. Thank you so much, guys. I appreciate all of my listeners, and I hope you guys have a wonderful week.